Now we're at the point where we're actually going to run the Roll20 campaign, or scenario, the Pathfinder Society scenario in this particular case. So I'm going to assume that for a second we're going to be not doing this through play-by-post, but actually running it in a live Roll20, like a live Roll20 game. So for this, obviously as we run each section through the map itself, what I'm going to do is show you some of the tools that are available to actually run that. The big part, of course, is we've got everything all set up. We've got our tokens for our players already in play. And we've got our NPCs, the enemies, and we've got our map all there so that everybody can see what's there. But before anybody can even join the game, they need to have the link. So the link here is under the, will always be at the top of the chat in the journal here, and I can just hover over it, copy that, and send that to any of the players so they can join the campaign. When they join the campaign, then they'll be presented with what is currently active on the screen itself. So for me to be able to do that, I need to make sure that this little ribbon is on the appropriate map. So if I want them to see different maps, I move the ribbon, I'll go from one map to the other. It'll actually refresh for the players. You'll note that it didn't change for me, the GM. This means that I can show the players something and then I can flip to another map and do some setup if I need to. And then toggle the actual ribbon so they can see the stuff that I've done. So if something happens in the session, for example, it changes the nature of the game a little bit, I can keep them in the dark, if you will, and let them see one particular screen, and then work in another screen. One thing I didn't do in this particular case that I do like to do is I will often create a starting page that just has the name of the scenario or a quick image, and maybe their tokens in it so they can set up their tokens, and then they can use that to copy that stuff over from one screen to the next. Oftentimes, especially if you're setting this well in advance and you want the players to be able to do some of their own setup, maybe even create macros, which is something we can get into another time, then it's a great way to allow them to do that without actually seeing all the guts and inner workings that you're working on. But we're going to assume that all that stuff is kind of passed by here, and we're just going to run through an actual situation. We'll even do it where we're going to actually run this combat itself. So, what I'm going to do, I've got all of my tokens in place. The first thing I need to do to run a combat in Roll20 is I need to bring up the initiative tracker. So that icon is this little, looks like a little clock here. So I'll admit that the icon is perhaps not the most intuitive, but once you do there, it brings up the turn order itself. Now if I want to add a token to turn order, I can select it, right click, and click Add Turn. It shows up in there. Or feeling particularly lazy or smart, I'll just select multiple tokens, right click, click Add Turn, and it adds them all to you. You'll know, of course, that any names that were there come across for that. So if I change this token's name, for example, I did say that I was going to associate it to Rathan. Rathan has got tons of hit points. Let's just say he's got 100 hit points. He's pretty tough. I can do that. There we go. So our two tokens are in there. But everything's set to 0 right now. Now, players, of course, in the chat can make rolls. Doing any roll is usually just a question of typing /roll and then 1d20. So how many dice with the D for to separate the number of dice, and then the type of die falling after. So a d20 is 1d20, and I'm going to say for Rathan, he's got a high initiative, so it's plus 12. He of course crits his initiative. And I can drag this number over into the turn order. Or I could type it in. So for Begus, we'll just assume that I'll just up arrow in the chat hero and say the modifier is plus 8. He gets a 12. So for Begus, I can click on the number and then type 12. Now when you're running a live game, if there are multiple people doing this, everybody who's trying to type in is going to sometimes give you grief because it won't let more than one person type at a time. So I like the drag and drop approach. For NPCs, of course, I'll just say 1d20 for all their initiatives. And there are 6 of them. So I've rolled 6 times, and I will just drag numbers over for each one. So it's a pretty straightforward process just to get all their initiatives in there. if you are keeping things simple and grouping types of NPCs together, I may have only rolled twice to keep my life simple. One thing you'll note too, and this is something that I sometimes like to do or build into macros, is that when you've got duplicates, it's hard to tell who gets to go first. So either you'll need to do roll-offs if they have the same initiative modifier, or what I sometimes do is I will actually put a decimal value to it to indicate this is a 0. Maybe the scallywag, well, just for the sake of things here, his initiative was, he had a modifier of 1. So maybe I'll do 0.01 to indicate that his initiative modifier is 1. Just like with Rathan's, his would have been 0.12 because he had a modifier of 12, and Vegas's would be 12.08. Show that there. So again, I make this a little bit bigger. And now all of the numbers are in there. It's not in the right order though. I could drag and drop people around, which is good when you need to do things like handle delayed actions, for example. But what really I want to do is I want to sort this. So I can click on the cog again, and I'll just sort the numbers in descending order. There we go. Now my turn order is set. I'm ready to go. While Rathan goes first, he says, okay, I'm going to run and jump across. Well, he may make a roll, an acrobatics roll, another d20 roll. He will easily make it and land over there. And then another d20 roll and a damage roll. And they're all like slash roll, whatever. So if he was rolling, again, an attack roll, we'll say he's got plus 15. Their low AC means he still hits them. And then he would roll damage. 6 plus 8. And deal 9 points of damage. If he had sneak attack damage, then I could roll another 66. And everything shows across there. So he does a total of 31 points of damage. Annihilates this guy. Now, he's dead, so how do I give that so it's a visual cue? And the player probably told me, yeah, I attacked pink. So I, of course, can mark off his hit points. He's taking 31, so he's well past his negative hit points. There's really no reason for me to even do that. He's probably at negative con at this point even. So I'll just set it to 0. And then give the players a visual cue, because they don't necessarily see these bars. These health bars, they don't see them. That's me only as the player, as a GM I should say, because I'm the one who controls those tokens. So that history is kept. But I'll use some of the other icons here to indicate things, like this red X to show that he's died. He's a negative con, so he's definitely dead. If Vegas on his turn, and maybe I'll have this, we'll just move through it here, and Vegas on his turn maybe casts a spell. Maybe he does glitter dust on these 3 over here. So I would roll will saves for them, and then I would indicate once they almost assuredly fail, I would use some other token to indicate that they're blind. There's a lot of tokens here for it. I'll use this little sleeping icon here so that I get a reminder for me as a GM, and the players get a visual cue too, that they've been hit by this glitter dust and they're currently blinded. And when, of course, that fails off, that wears off, then I can do that. If I need to track turns for this type of thing, I can make it a little bit easier by using some of these circles as well too. I like to use this either for things where I need to track a certain number of rounds on something. It's great for barbarians to track their own rage, or in this case, we'll say that the glitter does last for 5 rounds. So I'll just use this there, and every turn there comes around, I'll just do -1, and that way I've got a good tracker on that. Or if he makes a will save, I can still track the rounds for the will save and just turn it off entirely. So let's say once it's done, bam, and then I can clean things out so now you can see again. So that gives me a few ways in which I can actually control the tokens, control status effects, and basically run the combat itself. Now, if I wanted to add anything on here, I actually have created for myself, and I know some other people who do this as well too. They'll create things for buffs, for example. So I've actually created some images for buffs. So I have Inspire Courage. I have a little token for players to be able to see what happens when Inspire Courage was coming up. So if Vegas happened to be a bard, I can actually put this little token in play, so the players can see that there's a buff up for it. Inspired Courage is up, they get +1 attack damage, and versus saves for Charm and Fear. things like that. This is kind of taking it outside of what you normally need to do. You don't have to do this type of thing, but I like to do this, and I know other people do this as well too. I picked it up actually from other people. It's a great little tip to be able to do that. Remind people of the buffs. At least for the standard one. Some of the stuff is going to be a bit more obscure or not obvious, so it might be hard to do that. In that case, use text. The nice thing about this is you do have the ability to just type in some text. I'll use red, change the color here. Maybe make the font a little bit bigger. And I'll just put in Inspire Courage. No, or Bless. Let's say Bless with cast. +1. Now all the players will see that there's a Bless. I can move this over to a place where it's not in the way. I can see these buffs added in there. So text is a great way to do that. You can also draw out shapes for things like that. So let's say, for example, I wanted to draw out that glitter dust. Well, I can use a polyline tool, and I'll use a different color here. Let's use purple. And let's say it was, we'll say it was centered around here, so it would be a 10 by 10 square. So let's just draw it. I'm just clicking different points. And it's not snapping here, I'm just clicking the points as I like to. But I'm trying to keep it aligned to the grid. And once I click on the last point together, it actually joins it all together. If I go back to our select tool, if I need to move this around for whatever reason, I can do that. It's really helpful that way. If I was like, okay, well, I know that's the range of glitter dust, how can I get more than 3 people? Well, I could do it this way. Let's see what that actual range would look like. So this would be me allowing myself, or even players, because players of course can draw out these shapes as well too, to get an optimal view of what would work for their 10 by 10 radius burst from their spell. Just an example. And of course, a delete key or a right click and delete, allow you to delete that off. So we've done a few things there in terms of actually tracking combat a little bit. We've seen that we can run some rolls, track some hit points in the system itself. But what if I was trying to get a sense for what range I had? Well, there's a ruler tool here that allows me to actually check that. So I can see that this guy is 20 feet away, 30 feet, and it's tracking our diagonals. And that's why when we're doing the map setup, setting up the right diagonal system is actually very useful. So you'll want to actually be able to have that set up when you are adding the pages itself for the maps. And then it tracks all that stuff. Now, if I'm not a super intuitive person when it comes to typing things out, I just want to have a dice roller itself and just do the dice rolling through the roller. I can, of course, you see there's the second from the bottom icon there, shows me the dice roller. And then I'll be able to roll any dice in there. There's a number of optional things like exploding dice for other systems. It allows me to do re-rolls of some of my most recent stuff. So if I had, say, multiple attacks, I could re-roll that. And say that hits again, I'll re-roll my 1d6 and add it my sneak attack, and we got some more damage. And that basically gets us our numbers in there itself. Now there's all kinds of macros and whatnot you can add in for a lot of the automation, but from the GM standpoint, that's not always worth the time and effort, especially because you're going to be running so many different monsters. So I typically just stick with the typing the /roll numbers out and running things that way. But that should take care of it. That should give you a good sense of all the elements of combat and moving maps that you might need to do, as well as tracking different things throughout a game session. Once you've finished your combat itself, you can easily remove all turns from your turn order by clicking the cog again, clear it all out, and close the turn order so that everybody can see the screen. This is actually something that I would recommend you do for every game, because if you keep the turn order up, going from one map to the other, sometimes Roll20 doesn't allow you to. It gets into a weird state about that, and it doesn't show all the turn orders for the players. So although we'll see things, the players might not. So I would recommend as a best practice that when you're going from one map to another, clear the turn order and close it off. And then when you flip over to the next map for the next encounter, bring it back up, add the turns in for the players and the new monsters, and then go from there. That should cover the majority of the things you need to do as part of running the actual game itself. A lot of everything else is going to be through discussion and you being an animated GM. So I hope this is helpful. And if there's any questions, just let me know. Happy to help out.